Ladies and we now have Arabile Gumede on stage. I'm hoping that my internet is still behaving, guys, because I feel like my internet is doing its own thing here today. I am in Durban. I mean, if I was in Johannesburg, it probably would be behaving much better. Good morning, Arabile. Is it morning? Yes.
Morning, Nicolette. Hope you're well. Look, your internet seems to be taking, unfortunately, a little bit, but we're all good. We're all good. I hope you're well. Okay, I'm not sure if Nicolette can still hear me.
Kicking me out.
There we go.
Literally, the internet is just kicking me out.
Oh boy.
I can see you talking, Aras.
Yeah,
so I want to get straight into the conversation. If you can hear me, talk to me about the markets while I sort myself out in terms of this internet connection.
Yeah, look, it's a weird place to be in, I suppose, right now, right? We've had the uncertainty of 2020 come and go. Everything has kind of happened, and we've sort of looked back and thought, okay, we survived. We're fine now. Markets sort of found some sort of neutrality. And what I mean by that is that stocks that were going down quite a lot are back to sort of similar levels before COVID-19 hit as well. The tech stocks still very good, but aren't climbing like they used to back in 2020. I mean, we saw Zoom go astronomically high, right, as a share price, even making the owner of Zoom a billionaire in the process when he had nothing at the time. I mean, we've even seen, before we used all of these different platforms, there was something called Skype. And even that, unfortunately, as a business, is faltering. I hate to say it, but it feels like the Nokia of this era, right? That's what Skype sort of feels like. They were the leaders in this market, falling by the wayside a little bit. So what has happened in this year? Well, markets have taken a bit of a turn, and they've said to themselves, we need to try and find things that are going to grow post the pandemic. So investors are trying to look for what exactly that's going to be. The banking stocks, pretty resilient, always doing the same thing over and over. So we're going to continue to see growth in the banking stocks. So those are not really invested in as much as people would have liked in the past or have done in the past. We saw resources, so gold companies, coal companies even, the conglomerates, the companies that do all of that, including platinum companies as well, do fairly well over the last year and a half. And that meant that their revenues were skyrocketing. It meant that the tax that they paid, even to our local government, that went even higher. So it meant that we actually got a whole lot more in the form of taxes as well from those mining companies as a country. And it meant that the budget was able to actually add just a little bit more to begin to pay for things like vaccines and healthcare as well. So those aspects are doing fairly well. So the market now still looking for direction in a sense. The US market has been going into records day in, day out, right? As investors continue to throw money into that market space. Let's remember that COVID-19 is more a health crisis than it is a market crisis. And because of that, it's a humanitarian issue. So markets kept saying, well, let's throw money into that scenario, unlike 2008, 2009, where it was a financial crisis. So there was no money to help that recovery. Banks have helped a huge recovery across many economies, including our very own here locally. So what we're finding then is that the recovery is actually a whole lot better. Things aren't going as bad as we thought. Locally, even the JSE hitting around 70,000 points at some stage. That's an absolutely huge number. Numbers we haven't ever seen. It's record territory across the board there. The big question mark, however, is on two things. One, currencies. So we're seeing our own rand against the US dollar. That's weakening quite a bit right now. We're above 16 rand against the US dollar. Sounds like our petrol price if you take a look at that, right? And the reason for that, well, the basic fundamental issue here is that as the rest of the world recovers, when you and I are looking for investments, or anybody for that matter, you're looking for the best place. You are willing to take on a little bit of high reward, high risk for your high reward, right? So when the strong markets like the United States, like Europe, are doing okay, then you look elsewhere, like the emerging market space. So when markets are going down, you take a look at that and you say, well, I'd rather get into the emerging market space. As things begin to normalize, though, unfortunately, money gets taken out of the emerging market space a little bit and goes back into those advanced economies, which means that their currencies are doing well. So you'll see that the US dollar is looking pretty good at this stage in time. It doesn't help, unfortunately, that we found a new variant of the coronavirus that was discovered by South African scientists too. That has impacted the local currency. It shot right through 16 Rand and hit 16 Rand 20 against the US dollar is the mark there as well. So it means that there's more weakness, less confidence in South Africa, less confidence in the ability for us to then fight this pandemic, and things will continue to get worse. The second issue then is we're getting a shortage of goods across the globe, believe it or not. Why? During the pandemic, we did not want as many things. So demand dropped. And so what happened to the system in terms of in transit, whether it be deliveries, whether it be shipping, that actually changed completely. And they started shipping less items. Now demand is coming back. We're thriving again. And what we're finding is that the ships, the retailers, the transit goods companies, all of those are now struggling to actually get back to where they used to be. So we're seeing a supply shortage across the globe, meaning that prices are also then going to skyrocket. When prices skyrocket, you need all of these people to plug in and make sure that even the consumer is able to continue paying. It's not that easy, right? And then you're paying for oil, you're paying for petrol, you're paying for all of those things. The oil price is shooting higher because we're so busy. We need to travel a whole lot more. Traffic is almost at the same levels it was at pre-crisis levels, meaning we're traveling a whole lot more. So demand is higher. So what happens to the petrol price? Well, steadily goes higher and higher. So look, the market is in a very weird space. There isn't, it tries to find an equilibrium, but it's very difficult to do so. And I think things will continue to be quite nerve-wracking, really, for many months to come, in fact, especially headed into the middle even of 2022. We're not in post-pandemic times yet, unfortunately. So it's going to be nerve-wracking for quite a while.
I mean, as I'm listening to you, oh, by the way, I can hear now, guys. So really excited for me because I'm like, I can hear finally, right? And just as well, because I literally caught you at such a very pivotal position in terms of our conversation. You were speaking ultimately about the recovery of our economy, but also looking at all of the other aspects that are going to have an impact, of course, on our pockets as households in South Africa. One of the things that we did see happening as this market is trying to recover and as the Reserve Bank is trying to stimulate that recovery is, of course, the increase of the interest rates, right? What does that mean for the ordinary person on the street?
Yeah, so it's kind of a big deal, right? A little bit earlier on with Salem, you were speaking about debt, whether it be prescribed debt or otherwise, whether it be your retail debt or anything else. That's going to cost you just that little bit more. Right? What do I mean is that even though you may have agreed with your bank on a particular rate, it depends on the fluctuations, it may have dropped a little bit and you could pay off that debt a little bit if you had the money, of course, depending on the situation. You could pay off maybe that debt at a faster rate because the interest rate was lower. Because when the pandemic hit, the South African Reserve Bank quickly dropped interest rates and basically halved them from where they were. The repo rate is the rate at which the banks, the big banks in South Africa, whether BFNB, Standard Bank, etc., borrow money from the Reserve Bank, right? That's the repo rate. That was dropped from 7% to 3.5%, and at an absolute low, at least for 50 years, at the bare minimum, right? But now it's increased again by a quarter basis points. That basically means it went from 3.5% to 3.75%. Yes, it's a small increase, but it does mean that it's going to cost you a little bit more to pay off your debt. We always say that an interest rate, of course, is the cost of your debt, right? And unfortunately, it does mean it's going to cost you a little bit more to pay off some of your credit cards, retail store cards, if you continue to have those, your vehicle, your home loans, etc. But there is a flip side to that, Nicolette. It means that if you are saving more, well, you're going to get just that little bit more, right? And you'll be able to gain just that little bit as well. What we're seeing is a sense of what people are calling policy normalization. That just means that because of the crisis, we saw things drop quite a lot when it comes to that interest rate. That wasn't normal. But to get things back to some sort of normality, the interest rate policy is also bound to go up. The Reserve Bank has always said, though, that that is going to happen quite gradually. So expect it to kind of happen over the next 2 years or so as the economy begins to recover. The hope, however, is that we don't push inflation too high, because their big thing is always going to be inflation. And they want it to kind of remain between 3 and 6%. And the moment it spikes out of that region, they get worried and they say, well, unfortunately, the only thing we can do is to make sure you don't pay astronomical levels for foods and services. And so we're going to have to increase interest rates. So hopefully it happens gradually over time.
The Monetary Policy Committee feels a little bit like the inflation police, right? Like for me, it's what should they prioritize? Are they prioritizing our growth, or are they prioritizing making sure we don't go past that inflation threshold that they've kind of put for themselves? So it's always one of those conversations like, you're like, okay, so what do we need in South Africa right now? I mean, ultimately, obviously, for growth to happen, we do need to make sure that we are controlling that inflation rate. Let's talk a little bit about, and it's great that you mentioned how abnormal the economy kind of turned in terms of this global pandemic crisis that we've just seen with COVID. And I mean, as you rightfully say, we are only starting to get into recovery. We're not totally post-pandemic as yet, as we've already seen. There's a new super variant that has been discovered in well, we've discovered it in South Africa. Doesn't necessarily mean it's from here, right? How does one foolproof themselves from an economic interruption? Because what we do see is the fact that a lot of people, the reason they get into financial distress is because they didn't have that cushion to fall back on when things started being abnormal.
Yeah, Nicolette, if anybody hasn't seen your videos before now, I'm going to be repeating you essentially, right? But ultimately, what we need to recognize is that planning for disasters is unfortunately up to us to start off with. It's kind of the first thing you need to do. So you can spend all your money and then save what's left, and I can promise you not much will be. Or you can save your money and then spend what's left. Because in that instance, then what you've saved is hopefully the buffer you're keeping behind for when things happen. Now, nobody could have predicted how bad and the impact of COVID-19. We've had health crises before, right? Not so long ago, we had Ebola. HIV/AIDS continues to plague now and always. We not so long ago even had the situation with our own food here in South Africa, the cold meats being a bit of a problem there too. Now, all of those things continue to happen, but not as, heavy and as interactive as COVID has been with regards to economies and how it has really destroyed people's lives. So the interesting thing here is that if you're going to survive any of it, you need to do as best as possible or as much as possible to avoid you falling completely flat. So one, yes, saving is the best tool here. Have as much of a reserve as possible, because it was our reserve as a bank, right? The South African Reserve Bank, that was able to then say, you know what? We will allow the banks to first reduce the interest rate, but also reduce the difficulty with which it takes for you to get a loan. So the processes that you used to need in order to get a loan, in order to get money, we will reduce all those requirements as much as possible so that you are still able to get that loan. And it's because we had reserves as a country. So imagine if you and I had reserves too. It means that we would be able to do a little bit more, last a little bit longer within this pandemic. So those are key elements. The second thing, perhaps, I mean, it's just perhaps going to increase income, but then also increases things like savings as well in future, is just having more than one income stream. It doesn't matter how little it is. It doesn't matter what it may be for. Um, Legal, of course. But the most important thing here is that you are able to fund your life and your future life, not using debt, but using your own income, your own business. If you are then retrenched for whatever reason, hopefully, touch wood, that doesn't happen. But the moment something like a pandemic then happens, you are able to shift focus still into that other stream of income that came to the fore, right? Nicolette, one of the big things that I was able to do is MC and host events and all of those things. And they were great to do before the pandemic, right? The pandemic hits, we're not gathering anymore. Nobody's meeting. Nobody's having award ceremonies. Nobody's asking you to MC an event, Arabile. So, but at that time, the moment things hit, I was still doing radio, I was still doing TV, and I was still writing. All things that still needed to happen despite the pandemic. So those streams of income were what I solely put my focus on, and I still was able to get through the pandemic in that way. So those things are absolutely imperative and so critical to survival in many instances too.
Let's talk a little bit about Spa's questions. Spa wants to understand if the interest rate hike is it supposed to discourage the use of debt?
Yes and no. I'm going to say yes, because of course it means that you're not going to look for debt now because it's going to cost you a little bit more to get it. And we're not trying to get people into debt. The debt crisis is exactly what we've sat with for the longest time. We had in South Africa, we had an unsecured credit bubble, meaning we had a crisis of unsecured credit. Unsecured credit means it's not backed by anything. When you get a car or you get a house, there's a backing behind that. When you start to ask the bank for money, maybe even just 20,000 Rand, they don't say, no, we'll take your house or car in lieu of that payment. They just say, well, we'll charge you 22% interest instead. That heavy interest rate is the big problem, right? So an increase, a little bit of that interest rate, hopefully deters everyone from getting more debt than they should get. On the other scale, no, it's not meant to deter you only from the use of debt, but also make you smarter about the decisions you make when it comes to debt. Paying it off as quickly as possible means that you sit back with less debt. People are able to make money out of debt. So also being smart about the use of, if you're taking that debt, the right decision into, because maybe you're using that debt to fund a business. Well, I mean, now you're taking money to make more money, right? So you're being smarter about it. And so they're encouraging a whole lot more people to think about the use of their debt and where exactly it goes. So it's a little bit of a two-way situation here. They're also encouraging people to save more, right? Because if you save more, the higher interest rate means that you're going to get a little bit more income in return. So there's a little bit of everything in that one.
I mean, that's definitely the one thing I wanted to highlight again, because you've said it, that at the end of the day, one of the things we do need to realize is that increase in that interest rate is also going to work for you if you do have those interest-based investments and well, invested in cash money market accounts, your 32 notice accounts, all of those things will start to actually give you a better return just based on the interest rate being hiked. Justice Khumalo would like to know, will the super variant that's been discovered affect the power of the rand? Because we have seen it dropping. So maybe I think as a preceding your response to Justice, maybe just explain to us what are some of the factors that do have an impact on the rand. I think people are saying, yeah, but when Zuma was president, the rand used to go up and down, and now Cyril is the president, the rand is not behaving the same way. So let's bust some myths in terms of the rand, and give us a little bit of some of the factors that do influence the up and down of the rand value.
Yeah, so our currency is like I'll copy the Reserve Bank governor in this response. He says that our currency is like our rugby team. It is a springbok, right? So it just hops anywhere it wants to and it goes. And then when somebody chases it, it's even worse because then it's going up and down the entire time. So it's going to change at every turn. We are the most volatile, or one of the most volatile currencies in the world. Why is that? And let me give you a reason. We are an emerging market. So still one of those markets that aren't big enough to be like the UK, the United States, China, etc. But we're still one of the better ones when you compare us to Turkey, Indonesia, even more African countries, Brazil, Russia, even in some aspects too. So because we're an emerging market and we're one of the strongest when it comes to the financial sector, people can trust where our money is being put and who is going to handle that money. So because they can trust that, they rely on us to kind of set the standard. So we become the proxy for the emerging market space. So when things go bad, they immediately look to South Africa and say, oh, as an emerging market, where are you guys going? So we're the first ones to take the brunt, unfortunately, in those instances. So if we aren't secure as a country and we have issues like July's looting and violence, well, investors go, whoa, is that going to be the case for many other emerging markets? Because that doesn't happen usually in South Africa, right? Now, if it's starting to happen in South Africa, how can I trust that my money is going to be okay? So what happens? The rand, unfortunately, weakens, all right? And it goes past 15 rand, headed towards 16 rand too. In a situation like we will have now, where the super variant is discovered by South African scientists, people get wary and say, will South Africa and other emerging markets in this space be able now to recover from COVID-19 as they had tried to before, considering that this means we're likely to get a more intense lockdown, right, heading into the festive season. The UK is cutting off visitors from South Africa unless you're a resident of the United Kingdom, because if you head there, you need to quarantine for at least 10 days minimum as a citizen of the UK. That means South Africa was getting 300,000 visitors, or was going to get 300,000 visitors from the UK during this December period. That means each visitor was plus minus going to spend at least 50,000 rand in South Africa. That's a lot of money. It cost us 1.5 million rand to get off the red list from the UK before. So we're losing around 790 million rand, 750 million rand, just because we will no longer have UK visitors. That was for every month that we were on the UK red list. It means that, and I'll break it down again, it's costing us 25 million rand every day that we don't have people from the UK coming into this country. That is how significant and important it is for something like that. Here's another explanation. If we have 300,000 less people, and this is just one country, let's remember the rest of the globe and their fears. If we have 300,000 less people coming into this country and spending their money, it means that they're not buying rands, correct? So less rands are being bought, meaning that we have to now try and sell rands. And to do that, we need to try and offer a little bit more in terms of interest, make sure that they understand, yes, come to South Africa. So we make that enticing for them. So we decrease how much our currency costs for them, meaning that our rand is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So yes, that super variant is going to hurt. Yes, we're begging, we're on our knees saying, yours and guys.
Okay, Tony's Benile, we can't come in, you can't come in, but please, man, still buy our rands. Please,
even if it's for investments, yeah, buy the rand. And let's remember, there's no reason to buy the rand. Right?
Absolutely.
Think about it. What do you actually need the South African rand for?
On top of that, we're rape capital.
100%. So you have all of those issues. We have all of those issues. Crime stats, load shedding, the fact that we're effectively one of the biggest rape capitals in the world. We have an insecure power supply, an insecure power supply compared to the rest of the world. Our water supply is also becoming shoddy, even though the quality of that water, when we do finally have it, is top notch. Fine, but the fact that we are not sure of when we will have certain things is affecting us quite heavily. So everybody's obviously going to buy the more advanced economies. Despite the UK putting this ban on us, we all know that the UK is still going to continue to grow. We know that the US is going to continue to grow. So all the advanced economies, including Germany, Italy, they're all looking at the situation going, we're still fine. We don't need South Africa for now. We'll come back there when things are okay.
We'll circle back to South Africa when it is time to circle back.
Exactly.
I can't see Arabile, is too blurry. I think it's on your side, Ritumeti. You see, now I've got the power of internet right now, and I can see him whilst I know it's your problem. I do apologize for that. Please just perhaps maybe you can log in and out again. Guys, I do need to apologize for Theo. He unfortunately has something that he's doing today. So at 12 o'clock, he had to dash. I'm so sorry we could not connect with him. But we will try and circle back and do another session where we can have him again to have a conversation with him to understand business, obviously, as a financial wealth asset. But yes, Arabile is definitely dishing out the truth, as Princess says. She says you are giving her a headache with all the truth.
You know, my job is basically one of just bad news. It's all I seem to dish out on a daily basis. Yeah, it's so hard.
I was about to say, Arabile, I'm going to need you to look at the market in a different eye, with a different light altogether, and give us some positivity. And I'm going to put you on the spot and say, what can we look for as people that are really just trying to manage their finances well, as people that are looking for opportunities in terms of increasing their income streams, as people that are looking to reduce debt? What can we look forward to? What should we be looking at? What can we do? You know, I don't want us to leave here feeling despondent and discouraged as people who are doing our part. You know, we're doing our part in our households, you know, and then the bigger macro space is just, that's where we're getting failed.
Continue to do the things you have been doing. Yeah. I know it sounds like the worst advice sometimes, because you're like, but how we're failing most.
But I'm doing it already.
Yeah, and you're just like, and I'm just like, stay in it, right? The reason things like investments, you feel like you've ended up failing, right, is not because you have failed, but maybe because you took your money out too early. Maybe you stopped investing in that company. You stopped showing faith. If the world stops showing faith in Facebook, what do you think will happen to that share price? Tanks. What happens to the billions that Mark Zuckerberg owns? Oh, apologies. I need to correct myself. It's not Facebook. It's Meta. Whatever that
means.
Metaverse. But nonetheless, like, all of those billions will continue to drop, right? So the moment you start losing faith, because unfortunately the markets aren't a real thing, and I unfortunately have to be really very, very frank about this. They aren't based on anything substantive, physical, that you can sometimes see. They're based on emotion, right? So you as a company go and invest in construction. You buy construction vehicles, you buy cement, you buy all of these things that you are building. And then you say to people, please invest in my company and I'll list on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, right? And then somebody says, you've just changed CEOs. Because of that, I've lost faith in your company, so I'm selling my shares. So what happens to your share price then? It drops. How? But I'm still selling cement. I'm still a construction company. My business hasn't changed. But your emotion on who leads my company is the reason why I will then lose out financially. So if we lose out on the faith in this country, unfortunately, we will continue to go down. So we actually need to continue to say, I hate how things are going, but I will fight to make them better nonetheless. Because without that, we will continue to traverse the worst of bad times. Things have been systematically worse and have gotten worse because unfortunately, we haven't resolved the issues we should have a long time ago. Situations and issues we knew 20, 25, even 27 years ago when we received our independence. But what did we do instead? We focused on issues that perhaps weren't beneficial in the long term, in the long run. Even post 2008, 2009 financial crisis, where we had a surplus, we could have quickly fix things from that point already. Instead, we just kept on going on this spending spree, right? And we thought that things are going to help. No, they aren't. The system we have in terms of electricity right now is the same system we had in 1994. Very little has changed. But do you realize that you've brought in half the country at the very least into this economy and said, you are also going to get lights? And then you want to give it to them for free at the same time too. That's not going to work, because where's your investment coming from? You're relying on a small tax base to say, you guys need to help push the rest of this country. So with all of that nonsense happening across this country, we still need to keep pushing our agenda. You still need to keep voting. And people will say, oh, coalitions are bad. No, we just don't have experience in them. It's going to take us a long time to actually get things going in this country, because people do need to negotiate. It's about time that the ANC was held responsible by a party within the same government to say, you can only make things happen if we all agree on it. Which, yes, means that things are now going to happen maybe a little bit slower, but the right things are then going to be happening. So don't lose faith. As somebody who invests in this country, who still lives in this country, who has houses, homes, the future, their children are still in this country, you cannot lose hope in South Africa. The moment you do that is the moment we crumble, not just as a country, but as a humanity too.
Yeah, guys, this is like hectic. And I think it's just facts. I mean, at the end of the day, I look at some of my assets and I'm like, unfortunately, they are dependent on a South Africa that is thriving for them to also thrive. You know, I mean, it's so funny because Herman Mashaba at some point came in and became the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. And unfortunately, fortunately, at some point while he was the mayor, he looked into all our property values, because he said, no, we're not contributing or paying enough of our municipal rates because of how our properties were valued. And he increased the value of our property, which we all didn't see. What we did see was the increase in terms of the municipal rate that you're going to pay. But we don't realize that in him doing that, it made my asset more valuable. Yes, I'm 100%. Paying more, but my asset is more valuable. And sometimes, unfortunately, we are so interlinked into the success and the performance of the country as a whole, so that the little assets that we have bought are still going to be thriving. I think you've made it very, very clear and put it on the table for all of us to consider and say, how am I going to react, or how am I going to deal with this going forward in my corner as a South African, as a patriotic South African for that matter. Guys, if you've got any questions for Arabile, please do throw them this way. I think it's going to be I almost gave away Arabile's secret, so I'm going to let him say it if he is ready to say it, or when he's not ready to say it.
It's
or
okay.
Maybe
I'm
waiting for a good time to say it.
Look,
but yeah,
next week is the official announcement, but you know, it's fair enough to say though, and I actually don't mind sharing it, because the company themselves have begun sharing it actually as well. You know, it's an absolutely huge opportunity, but the fact that, you know, I continue to look at the markets locally has been so great, and has been such a wonderful experience that I've been afforded the opportunity to do it on a more international scale. And you know, it really means a lot in that sense too, to then be able to, unfortunately, leave South Africa in the way of working for CNBC International in London, to really focus on Europe, the Middle East, but also on Africa. So that will be my portfolio when it comes to my financial reporting. Still making me available. We live in a digital world, Nicolette, so we can always do this. But it does mean that I will no longer be in South Africa for a little while. as I pursue the dream as well of being able to share financial news on a global scale. And so, yeah, I will be leaving next month, actually, right after Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, geez, I've heard this so many times, and every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh my God, he's going, he's leaving on that midnight train to London. I'm not,
Yeah.
guys, I'm
Oh
not serious.
man, it's been absolutely
But yeah,
crazy. Look, for some people who don't know, it's the weirdest thing. It's been over 10 years that I've been doing what I do, and some people are just like only realizing and seeing Arabile now and saying, "Oh wow, like who is this guy?" And I'm just
it's
like,
that guy.
I guess it took me 10 years to be an overnight success in some instances.
Here's the funny part: is that not the same sentiment that your favorite person Proverb shares? That everybody listens to him on Kaya FM and they think, "Ah, overnight success. How did he just get a radio show?" Forgetting that it's taken over 10 years for him to be able to get where he is. Yeah. But a huge congratulations, Arabile. So Arabile is going to be based in London, but as he said, he is still available to us. It's so funny because, guys, most of my proposals to brands all have like Arabile, Gumede, and Nicolette doing this. Arabile, I'm like, he's not going to be here. This man's not going to be here. But yeah, we're really proud of you. And I think today is another opportunity for all of us to remember why you do this, why you're so great, and why you're going to London. Because, wow, I mean, I sat here listening to you right now and I'm like, God damn, he really just understands the market and to explain it in layman's terms. And I mean, it's always a big ask, one, but also a big privilege to be able to bring down their market language to us ordinary folk. That's something that is just, it's not everybody who can do it. So we really do appreciate all of that. There is a question coming through. It came in, I think, from Sharon. She would like to know, maybe as we are working hard to improve the country's economy, how do we as ordinary people contribute in changing the narrative or the dependency on foreign currencies? Where could be the starting point that we as a community can do to contribute?
Yeah, so a lot of this, let's remember, we have local investments and local investors and international investors too. One of the big things that was a drive a few years ago was the purchase of local bonds. They were called SA retail savings bonds. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And you could
they still there. They still there.
You see, so this is my issue. I went and spoke to National Treasury and I said, listen, you keep saying you don't have enough money. You're struggling. You're wondering where you're going to get money from. And yet the mere campaign, the simple campaign you had not so long ago to urge South Africans to put in at least 1,000 Rand into a retail savings bond, to be able to then, you as a government, then use that money. You're the safest bet in the world. So basically, I will always get my money no matter what. Yes, the interest rate won't be that much, but as a patriotic citizen, we'll continue to want to invest in our own country. That is still one of the best ways for you and I to keep the dependency on our own currency flowing. Because the more our government depends on local debt, you and I, means that they don't have to go to the bond market and ask international investors for money, which means that they would then have to buy foreign currency, especially when they have to pay it off. So less rands are leaving this country. So when I say getting into retail savings bonds is critical, I'm begging you, look into National Treasury's website. Look for those SA retail savings bonds, the 10-year, the 15-year. Even if you want to just do the 5-year bond, get into that and realize that, yes, the interest rate won't be the most competitive as we're looking for, right, in other investments. But what it does is the long-term impact of that on the country is such that our country, our national treasury, our finance minister won't depend on international borrowings as much as he does right now. So that's probably the best way, Cheryl, that I'll really encourage people to get in and use that as one of the key methods of ensuring that they that they use their foreign currency, or that we don't have dependency on foreign currency. Another thing, travel the country.
Yeah, please.
Travel the country. Do not be shy of doing that. I don't care what the situation is. And you know, Nicolette, yes, I leave off to London, whatever the case might be, but I'm going to holiday in South Africa because if anything, it means that I bring pounds back here, right? So now I'm making a greater dependency on South African currency, bettering this environment. So if anything, you know, it's about being as patriotic as possible. And those SA retail savings bonds are really, really important, I think, for the future of this country.
Absolutely. And I think also your second point to it is as powerful as your first one. Travel the country, guys. I mean, our tourism industry is really on its knees. And yes, they need transformation themselves. There's a couple of things they need to fix. You know, their pricing model is very old. It does not work. It does favor your international tourists. But the reality is, at the end of the day, we can save South Africa. And Cheryl, I think it's such a good question because it shows the patriotism that we've got towards making things work in South Africa. And I think Arabile has really shared two powerful points in terms of where you can start off. And more than anything, you know, both those points that he shared, what also makes them fantastic is the fact that they're for your benefit. At the end of the day, if you're investing in SA retail bonds, it's your interest that you're going to get back. And they guarantee you your money back, you know, and over and above that, traveling should be part of a good quality life. You know, we should travel not only for just a leisure and making it a luxury, but we should travel for the history of South Africa, understanding other people. I mean, I'm in KwaZulu-Natal now, and I'm still bothered every single time I speak to somebody here. They don't know the basics of they don't know the basics of Sesotho, basics of Istonga, because some of them, unfortunately, you know, from their own undoing, have never left the province, so they've never seen other parts of South Africa. I mean, it's shocking that there are people in this country who have not seen every single of South Africa, and it should not come with a monetary value.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody is still getting Nicolette. We seem to have lost her again. I think it is just an internet issue. In the meantime, I'm going to try and answer another question that I saw here as well from Lefa, which is, will this new variant affect the imports and exports again like it did in the beginning of COVID? Yes, and again, maybe no. I guess that's another question that comes with a yes and no. Remember that trade right now is fully dependent on, yes, those health measures and all those other situations. Welcome back, Nicolette. Sorry, we seem to have
Thank you.
But I saw Lifa's question as well, just on the side, and I apologize. I took that on and said, you know, will this new variant affect the imports and exports again like it did at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic? And again, yes and no. Why? Because what you're seeing is the import and export business, trade, effectively, is fully dependent, yes, on ensuring that things like the transmission of the virus don't happen, right? But what has been put in place over the last 22 months at the very least is the fact that people understand how to deal with things now. We're a whole lot more cleanly. So sanitizing your goods has become absolutely imperative. So things won't necessarily change in that sense. Yes, there'll be a worry as to how much more medical equipment do we need as a country, what needs to be done to enhance the virology investigations and scientific discoveries in this country. That is going to be very important. And that means maybe we may need international help. I mean, we don't really create, you know, sort of these vaccines here in the country. And if we were able to develop our own vaccine, imagine how much more worthwhile things would be. So yes, it's going to impact things, but I don't think it's going to impact the trade business as much as it did before, just purely because of experience. The markets kind of learn how to deal with things. You and I have learned how to make our businesses resilient through this pandemic. So I'm pretty sure on a trade perspective, you'll kind of see the same thing as well. So I think that will be quite key to watch. Yes, things might become a little more expensive as that happens, but I don't think it will really choke off the supply chain as we expect it to usually do. So yeah, I just thought I'd answer that question as well, Nicolette.
Yeah, Bong. This is what happens when you have a seasoned and an experienced MC, because he realizes that this MC host is God. Let me pick up and just go with it. I really do appreciate that. But guys, I think I've kept you here for a very long time. It is a Saturday. Apparently, weekend enkulu. I don't know what that means, but listen, I'm just here. I'm here to work.
Please,
why is it
can everyone just be safe? Nicolette, can people just be safe though? You know, that's the first and most important thing. We head into this festive season. There is that likelihood and that possibility that our President Cyril Ramaphosa and the National Coronavirus Command Council have decided maybe to, you know, bring us back onto stricter lockdown rules and measurements. So whatever you do, I get it. We're tired. We're all COVID fatigued, believe you me. But there is no substitute for taking care of yourself health-wise in this situation. None. Because no matter what, you and I still need to survive this, come out of it and help rebuild this economy. So please, please, just be safe out there.
Absolutely. I think that's really something that all have a responsibility to ourselves, is to be first and foremost as safe as possible, but also a responsibility to others. I think, you know, we are all as weak as the most vulnerable person in the country. So if we don't take care of that, nobody's going to take care of us. So really, thank you so much to Arabile. Thank you to Ace. I know Ace also had to drop off. She's got something to do today. Thank you, Salim. If you are still here, thank you so much for sticking around. As I said, Salim and I do owe you guys a video. I will try and squeeze in a couple of videos with Arabile before he leaves for London. And thank you to Theo, who did really try. I mean, he was here the entire time. He tried to log in, but we had a little bit of technical glitches there. Absolutely, the biggest thank you goes to all of you guys that did tune in today. We really do appreciate your time. We appreciate this checking in. We appreciate you just asking your questions and really getting as much as you can. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do more of these things. I know this year I have slacked so badly, guys. Like, I have slacked so badly. But as Arabi said, we've been trying to recover, for especially us, you know, who work in the broadcast space. It hasn't been great. But you know what? We're here. Nothing is going to deter us. We're here. So thank you very much. I'm going to share everybody's details. So what the nice thing about this system is that it allows to send emails to all of you guys. So I'll send Salim's details. I'll send you guys Ace's details if you want help. I'm not giving you Arabile's details, okay? I'm just joking, guys. If you are looking for Arabile, he's available everywhere on social media, so you can get in contact with him. But yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the streets.